Now I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 5. It's subtitled Hell of a Hooker of Shelley Lubben's book, Truth Behind the Fantasy of Porn, the Greatest Illusion on Earth. I'll also provide a little bit of commentary on this, I'm sure, as I read it. Or will I? We'll see. We'll see. But if you want to stop watching now and go back and familiarize yourself with this book, I have commentaries of chapters 1 through 4 linked up over on pornnewstoday.com, just so y'all know. It's also linked up on Alexandra Mayers live.com. So here we go. Chapter 5. It's story time, boys and girls. A brazen blonde bombshell with stage names like Marilyn and Blondie, I hustled myself through 8 years of stripping, prostitution, and plenty of porn. I started my career at a strip club called The Top Hat. At 17 years old, when I still lived at home in Glendora, California, it wasn't hard to steal an older girl's ID and dupe the owner into it. And besides, I could dance. I could dance so well that even Michael Jackson would have been proud. In fact, my first audition, I did the moonwalk topless to Billie Jean, while men in plaid shirts whistled and threw crumpled dollar bills at me. When I flipped my head around and saw those truckers slide off their stools and come and get a closer look at me, I jumped off the stage and ran straight for the front door, swearing to God I would never strip again. Never say never. I ended up a year later on a grimy curb in the San Fernando Valley, the porn capital of the world, where I sat on the edge of a busy street crying my eyes out, with sobs flying out of my throat. I hadn't eaten for 2 days, and I was starving. I thought about getting a job, but I didn't have a driver's license. I tried begging for money, but nobody wanted to help. My situation seemed hopeless. I looked over at the black Bible I brought with me and cried out to Jesus for answers. Jesus, where are you? How could you let this happen to me? You told me when I was a little girl that I would preach the gospel to thousands of people. Now I'm sitting here homeless with nothing to eat or drink. I need you to do a miracle right now. I sat there under the hot sun and sobbed for hours on that faded and cracked curb on Sherman Way. Desperate and dehydrated, I didn't care if I died. To my surprise, I heard a man's voice, and I looked up and saw a handsome, well-built black man staring down at me. He looked like an angel. "What's wrong, honey? Why are you crying?" he asked as he sat down next to me on the curb. With swollen eyes and spit hanging out of my mouth, I sputtered, "I'm homeless and I don't have any food or money. My dad kicked me out of the house and I don't know what to do." I sobbed even harder and lowered my head into my sticky hands to hide my tears. I was so ashamed and humiliated. The nice man put his arms around me and gently pulled me towards him. When my head landed on his chest, I felt an inexplicable relief. It was the first time in my life that an older man had held me so tenderly. It felt so good. I never wanted to leave that feeling. I just wanted to stay wrapped in his arms and rest my head on his big warm chest. After he held me for a few minutes, he gently turned my chin towards him and said to me, "I can help you, honey. I can get you some money. and some food. Immediately, I thought Jesus had come to rescue me. I sat up excitedly to listen closely to the handsome man as he continued, "There's a man in the apartment complex across the street who thinks you're real pretty and would like to make love to you for $35. What? My mouth dropped open. Was this man asking me to be a prostitute? I was a lot of things, but I definitely wasn't a prostitute. No way, I said as I sat back in disgust. But he assured me in a soft-spoken voice that the man who wanted to have sex with me was very nice and would be gentle with me. He told me he could get me a lot of money and that I could get my own apartment and that I wouldn't have to live on the street anymore. I began to think about my parents and what they did to me. I thought about how they were sleeping soundly in their comfortable beds while I sat here on the curb all day and night with no money or food. I thought about the last cold-hearted words my father said to me. "You're dead to me." That's when I heard a low voice whisper into my head, "God doesn't care about you. Your parents don't care." And full of hatred, I thought to myself, yeah, why should I care? And I agreed to sell myself for $35. I am going to provide a little commentary there. We're going to pause there. Whether you choose to compromise yourself for $35 or $3,500, it's never enough money. At least not from my perspective. It just never is. It's never enough money. That's why a lot of people look at adult entertainers, people who are civilians at least, and they think to themselves, how is it that that super pretty girl has done at least 20 movies, yet she's continuing and never seems to have any money? It's because once you're paid that money for compromising yourself, you take that money and you got to do stuff for yourself to try to fill that void, to make yourself feel better for what you've done. At least some people, that's how they feel. And it's just a vicious cycle that perpetuates itself over and over. Another thing I want to talk about, and this is going to be controversial, but it's the reality. Keep in mind, Shelley Lubben was a white woman, Caucasian. And the first man, at least according to this book that she wrote, who pimped her was a black man. Now, Shelley Lubben was incredibly kind to me. She actually helped save my life. I wouldn't be sitting here today if I hadn't met Shelley Lubben when she was alive, and I want everyone to always remember that. Don't ever think I am Shelley Lubben, because I'm not. I'm not really anything like her. But she did, her energy helped to save my life. Okay? So anyone who's like, oh, Shelley Lubben, she was a fraud. She didn't do anything. She didn't help anybody. I'm living proof. And there's others like me. They might not be as vocal as me, but she saved a lot of lives. Just by being herself. Not by being Shelley Lubben even, by being Shelley Moore. Because she was Shelley Moore before she was Shelley Lubben. But my point is that Shelley Lubben could have looked at this situation and become incredibly racist, prejudiced, a bigot. But she didn't. She didn't. A lot of people look at a lot of white adult entertainers who are openly racist, and they wonder why. I don't condone racism at all, but part of the reason that many adult entertainers who are white or Caucasian become racist is because of the treatment that they receive from people of color who may pimp them, who may exploit them, who may treat them like a piece of garbage. Sometimes you have to work through your hatred as you heal. I'm still going through a lot of healing, and I've come to the realization that there have been a lot of white privileged enabled sex traffickers who have tremendously negatively affected my life, and I'm working my way through it. So just remember, it's a healing process, but it's important to heal from things like that, because when you don't, you embody animosity, and it causes you to lash out in very unhealthy ways later. I've seen Dawn Vanguard lash out racially quite a bit. And I think it's because she's never come to terms with how she was, at least from my perspective, sex trafficked by her own husband, who was African American. So I hope that one day she can face that, because I think that if she were to face that, it would help her let go of some of the bigotry and racism that she embodies. But anyway, let me continue. I was so nervous when he opened the door. The room was dark and I could barely see what the man looked like. "Hello," an older voice called out as I shut the door behind me. I didn't answer or make a sound. We were just two complete strangers, standing in the dark together. He moved closer to me and pulled my head towards his face. I tried to turn away, but he held my head tightly and kissed me. After a couple of minutes, I began to feel comfortable because the man was very gentle. In fact, I remember thinking he kissed much better than the high school boys I had dated. This isn't so bad after all, I thought to myself, and I walked away with 35 big ones. After the pimp lured me in with a nice first trick, he started to set me up with perverse men who demanded bizarre sex. When I refused to do certain sex acts, the pimp threatened me with physical abuse and tried to lock me in his apartment. But I was so full of rage that I busted out his big black arms and ended up on another curb in Ventura Boulevard. By then, I was in full survival mode. I started walking the streets boldly, asking men if they wanted to have sex for money. One time, I approached a mechanic shop, and the manager took me into the restroom where he ejaculated and bled all over my face. The blood scared me so badly that I knew I had to get off the streets. I ran out of the mechanic shop in tears, crying out to God for help, but there was no answer. I soon met a girl named Beth who warned me that I was going to get killed if I kept walking the streets. She introduced me to Vanessa, a madam who ran a prostitution house. I really didn't want to do prostitution anymore in any form, so I begged Vanessa to let me weed her lawn in exchange for letting me stay a couple of months. She tried to talk me into turning tricks, but I was too traumatized after the pimp and the blood, so I adamantly said no. She knew what she was doing, though. Every morning, she gave me a shovel and a trash can and made me work 8 hours a day under the hot California sun. While I was dying in the heat and wiping the sweat off my muddy brow, the other girls were sitting comfortably inside in an air-conditioned house, wearing lingerie and drinking iced teas. I would watch the men come through the gate one by one, and exactly 1 hour later, I watched them walk back out with a huge smile. The girls looked really happy too. They were counting their money while I was shoveling dirt. And that same low voice came to me again and said, "God doesn't care. Your parents don't care." Yeah, I thought. Why should I care what anyone thinks? So I sold myself again, only this time for $150. And let's pause there. I posted a little earlier tonight a Dr. Drew clip that was posted on YouTube a while back that was what I can only define as a showdown between Shelley Moore, aka Shelley Lubben, and Dawn Vanguard. It's a very interesting clip to watch if you're familiar with the entire contents of this book, not just this chapter I'm reading tonight, because I think what Shelley was trying to do by talking to Dawn was talk to her younger self and warn her younger self and try to save her younger self. But she couldn't. Because what's interesting is that the woman that Dawn Vanguard is today, in actuality, is the girl who Shelley Moore describes in this book at this particular point in this particular chapter. Dawn Vanguard is essentially the girl Shelley Moore was, who at that point in time did not like sweating in the California sun, who didn't like working hard, authentically, for a living, who instead just wanted to sit in lingerie in the air conditioning, drinking some sort of a sweet beverage, and selling herself for a few $100s. That's what it is. Vanessa taught me things my mother never taught me. For example, she taught me about feminine hygiene. After a client complained about me and I was utterly humiliated, Vanessa threw a sponge at me and taught me how to properly wash and groom myself. She was the most brazen and unashamed woman I'd ever met. Not only did she teach me about cleanliness, but she taught me how to manipulate men in a variety of ways. I learned things like how to put a condom on a man without him ever knowing it. I learned how to fake an orgasm for men who wanted to be heroes. "Oh yeah, baby, I'm gonna come." Yeah, right. I learned how to barter sex for clothes, jewelry, and furniture. Vanessa and I would regularly visit jewelry shops on Ventura Boulevard and make deals with the owners. I was never without rings on my fingers. I also learned how to talk clients into giving me more money. Vanessa taught me how to stall sex acts and redirect men to talk about their fantasies until their hour was up, and then they had to pay me for more in order to have the actual sex. I used to brag endlessly that I could clean any man's wallet out, and I was merciless. I wanted every last nickel and penny from those selfish, needy pigs that required a prostitute for an hour. How pathetic. What is more pathetic is that I got pregnant twice during the first 14 months I was a prostitute. Though I was taught to be careful and use condoms, unfortunately, I learned the hard way that condoms can and will break or leak. In fact, men oftentimes tried to break condoms on purpose. That's how piggish they were. I learned a lot of hard lessons that first year of prostitution. I learned that losing a baby was extremely physically and emotionally painful. I was only 8 weeks pregnant when I lost my first baby. I blamed myself, and I swore I would never do prostitution again. So I left Vanessa's house and hitchhiked my way to downtown Los Angeles, where I found a job as a taxi dancer in a hostess club. Taxi dancing is really just a form of prostitution with clothes on, but of course, I didn't know that. I thought there were men in this world who actually wanted to dance. I'm going to pause there. Y'all remember how, I think just a week or so ago, maybe a couple weeks ago now, Kanye West was highly criticized by certain elements of the media and the entertainment industry and the adult entertainment industry in regards to his statement that strip clubs are sex trafficking. Now, he actually said that statement as a play on words, and his analysis at least was, well, men are trafficked in and trafficked out. Yes. So from a male perspective, yes, it is like that. But in quite a few cases, it actually is human trafficking. I've witnessed women from other countries who didn't realize that they were coming to America to be exotic dancers. They thought they were coming to America to be domestic workers, housekeepers. I've witnessed women be coerced into that kind of work. I witnessed it in legal strip clubs back when I was a bartender mainly, but also shortly or briefly an exotic dancer. So Kanye West was telling the truth. Shelley Lubben's telling the truth. People don't want to admit it. No, I'm not saying all exotic dancers are sex trafficking victims. Some are not. I'm not saying all porn stars are sex trafficking victims. Some are not. But a higher percentage are than the adult entertainment industry and mainstream Hollywood entertainment industry itself would like you to realize. Okay, just realize that. I sat on the couch every night at 8 o'clock, waiting for some strange man to punch my time card so I could get paid. Lined up on a red sofa with other young blondes and brunettes, I felt like a piece of candy in a candy store. Pick me, I thought, as I smiled at each man as he walked through the door. I saw skinny ones, fat ones, and mostly old ones walk through that door each night. One night, an Asian man picked me and led me to a spot on the darkly lit dance floor where nobody else was around. He slipped $100 bill into my hand and started rubbing himself against my thigh. I didn't want him to ejaculate on my dress like the last guy had done, so I suggested we go to a booth for more privacy. I learned real fast that men wanted hand jobs, not dances. When we got to the booth, I tried to stall him in order to get out of doing a sexual favor. He ended up liking me and offered me $200 more to have dinner with him. Of course, I said yes and fell in love with his money right away. He told me his name was Toggy and something Chang. It was all Chinese to me. I went to dinner with Toggy the next night and we started dating professionally. I offered him a pretty face and companionship, and he gave me money and gifts in exchange. It was the perfect love affair. So in other words, she got a sugar daddy. It turned out the guy was more interested in his gambling addiction and loved to take me to the bicycle club, where I learned how to play Texas Hold'em while he played Pai Gow, a Chinese gambling game. Whenever Toggy hit it big and was in a good mood, he spent hundreds of dollars on me. But when he had a bad night, he would do things like yell at me in the parking lot and threaten to kill people. I discovered he had a cocaine addiction on top of his drinking and gambling habits. As much as I wanted to dump him, I preferred to deal with a rich Chinese man with a temper rather than a bunch of slimy men who wanted to rub themselves on me every night at the Hostess Club. It never dawned on me to quit the sex industry completely, because where could I go for help? All I knew how to do every single day was survive. And it's interesting that she says that because the question of where could she go for help? Later she did go to help, but where could she go for help is a question that I think a lot of adult entertainers still are asking. And you know who one of the only people is right now who's someone who's offering to help? It's the woman who Dawn Vanguard has been mercilessly demonizing, the woman known as Melissa Hill. And that's proof of the industry trying to bar adult entertainers from receiving actual help. Because Dawn Vanguard is the president of the Porn Industries Union. And she is actively doing everything that she can in her power to stop women looking to leave the industry from looking at Melissa Hill as viable assistance. And all Melissa Hill is offering is emotional support. Free emotional support. It's not me offering it. Melissa Hill has offered me emotional support when I get flashbacks from having worked in that world. Okay? It's a miracle that Melissa and I are even friends. It's a miracle because she was afraid to contact me. I was afraid to contact her because so many people who were interested in us never connecting fed us both misinformation about each other, including Dawn Vanguard being one of the most deliberate proponents of doing that. But God intervened. God intervened. And God's intervening right now at this very moment. God's intervening through me. God's intervening through Melissa. God's intervening through Bobby Dillon. And I think God's intervening through the spirit of Shelley Lubben right now, because Shelley Lubben, I don't think, is done with Dawn Vanguard. From the other side, Shelley Lubben is talking to Dawn Vanguard right now, at this moment. Still trying to get her to listen. Will she? I don't know. After a while, Taghi demanded sex with me. So one fateful night, we ended up at the Bonaventure Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. He was in his usual bad mood, so I tried to get the deed done as soon as possible. When we walked into the elegant room, I remember wishing I was on my honeymoon instead. But my life was filled with shattered dreams, so I quickly pushed that ridiculous notion out of my head and put sexy white panties on at Taghi's request. Nodding in approval, he put 2 $100 bills in my hand and pulled me onto the bed. During the whole 2 minutes we had sex, the condom kept falling off and semen leaked all over me and inside of my body. I jumped off the bed and ran to the bathroom to try and clean myself out. Taghi asked me in his rough Chinese accent, "What's wrong?" What's wrong? Was he kidding? Everything was wrong. I didn't want to get pregnant again from a prostitution act and give birth to some Asian child. I turned the bath water on and worked feverishly to get any and all bodily fluids off of me, but I had an awful feeling. I have to stop and comment here because I did not accurately read that paragraph, and I didn't read it accurately because it was actually racist. But I don't think that Shelley would have been racist towards people of Asian descent had she not been in a situation to where she had to be a prostitute. Sex work feeds into racism because sex work makes women angry at men. And you don't want to be mad at all the men. So you have to find some way to categorize men. You have to look for a way to just be mad at certain men. So oftentimes racism is the solution. Being a sex worker and having to deal with clients as a prostitute, especially if the client doesn't treat you well, can definitely make you look at people of all the people of a certain race who happen to be the race of that man who treated you horribly as being demons. It really can. I've seen it happen to white women. I've seen it happen to black women. It's happened to me to a degree. You try to overcome things, but once that seed of hate is planted in you, it's real hard to weed it out. It's real hard. Anyway, to continue, what I said was some Asian child, but what Shelley did right was some ugly Asian baby. And I think that was a mentality that her eldest daughter may have always felt and known. 3 weeks later, when my breasts were swollen and I didn't start my period, I took a pregnancy test and it came back positive. I couldn't believe it. I was so fuming mad at myself. Questions raced through my mind. How could I let this happen? How am I going to work pregnant? Should I have an abortion? What will my parents say? I didn't know what to do. There was no one to turn to for help. I looked down with tears in my eyes while rubbing my barely pregnant tummy. So just to summarize, Shelley Lubben wound up getting pregnant by this Toggy individual. I knew I couldn't kill my baby. I still had some values from what I learned at church. I thought about giving the baby up for adoption, but then I'd be left wondering every day if the baby was in a good home. I thought about my parents raising the baby, but that thought quickly vanished. So I made the choice to keep my baby and figure out a way to support us. I couldn't go back to prostitution again. No way. And when I told Toggy, he freaked out and threatened to take my baby away. So I had to come up with a plan. It didn't take me long to find a Mexican strip club on the corner of Flowers and Figueroa. I was only 18 years old, but I had already stolen an ID from a girl back at the taxi club when I needed one for gambling. As I walked down the street from my hotel, I saw a tall brick building with a flashing neon topless sign on it. I didn't speak much Spanish, but the owner didn't seem to mind. He saw a young blonde with green eyes who was 21 years of age and hired me instantly. At first, I loved working at the Mexican strip club. When the Hispanic men saw I could dance like a female Michael Jackson. Those dollar bills came flying at me. Unlike most American men, Hispanic men loved to be entertained by a good dancer. I did the moonwalk, the splits, grabbed my crotch, and the whole enchilada. As the song Beat It came to an end, I jumped up on the railing, ripped off my bikini top, and threw it into the crowd. Olé! The Hispanic men loved me and called me La Güera Loca, the crazy blonde girl. I made so much money in that club that it was literally falling out of my bikini bottoms. When I went to the restroom to count my propina, tips, I sometimes found folded in dollar bills were little bags of cocaine inside. I knew it was probably bad for the baby, but just a little, I thought. Exhausted from dancing 8 hours a night and being pregnant, I rolled up a dollar bill and snorted a couple of lines. And then I could really dance. I danced my drug-induced heart out and hustled those hot Hispanic men for 3 solid months until I became old meat. Once a girl has worked in a strip club for a few months, it's common for men to get bored of her and demand new meat. That's why girls in the industry move around so much. That's why porn stars change their names so often. When a girl becomes old meat, we have to come up with new tricks. It's just part of the game. I had an itch for Hollywood, so I started looking around on Melrose Boulevard and found a topless club called The Last Call. But this club was different than the Mexican club. First of all, the club had a full bar, so that meant drunk, stupid men. Secondly, the club had whiter clientele, so that meant more competition for me. Sure enough, I walked in and there were hot blondes and stunning brunettes who were prettier and more experienced than me. Not to mention I was 3 months pregnant. I'm going to pause there. This is actually a really good read specifically for white Americans, white privilege enabled Americans. Yeah. You know, when Shelley was alive, I guess because of this particular chapter in her book, but she really wasn't. A lot of people, especially her biggest critic, a dude known as Whiteacre, tried to label her as racist. But race is such a big part of life, isn't it? It really is. And honestly, I think every white privilege enabled American should read this, because the only reason certain women in the industry do have a positive experience in any capacity is specifically due to the element of white privilege. It really is. I mean, you really wouldn't even have adult entertainment if it weren't for white privilege, because that's what allows it. That's what allows the legal and illegal prostitution. I mean, really think about it. Isn't it wild that there actually are legal pimps in America? Isn't it wild that there was a legal pimp who also became a Republican politician who won the election? Unfortunately, he was dead when he won, and I'm talking about Dennis Hoff, but he did win. And he did win as a Republican. And all of that was possible due to the element of white privilege. Would I talk about white privilege had I never been an adult entertainer? We'll never know, will we? Let me continue. The owner was a little smarter than the last guy and questioned me about my so-called driver's license. But of course I lied and he bought my story, or at least he let her story slide. By now, I was a practiced liar. That's the norm for a sex worker. That's why we're called hustlers. That's why one of the world's most popular adult magazines is called Hustler. Need I say more? Meanwhile, I worked up the guts to tell my parents about the upcoming arrival of their first grandchild. I thought they actually might rejoice a little and offer to help me, but I was wrong. My mother's cold response was, "Well, if anything happens to you, I'm not raising that baby." Her words crushed me. I needed my mother more than I ever did. And at least according to this read, unfortunately, her mother suffered from NPD, and her mother was a big reason why she went into the adult entertainment industry. I hustled for more than 4 months at the strip club until one night when the owner pulled me aside and told me it was time to go home. I guess my pink fluffy skirt wasn't cutting it anymore. I applied for financial aid from the state of California and received barely enough to pay rent for the dumpy duplex I called home in Huntington Park. I was the only white girl who lived within a 10-mile radius in an all-Hispanic neighborhood. It was much cheaper than Hollywood, and anyway, I landed there by accident. When I agreed to move in with a Mexican girl, I met back at the Mexican bar. But I didn't mind. I was la juera loca. After I quit stripping to stay home and be a good wayward pregnant girl, I began preparing for the arrival of my new baby. A friend from the strip club who used to regularly come and visit me offered to buy me some things for the baby. When he showed up at my doorstep with several big shopping bags and a 4-foot white teddy bear, I was stunned. Nobody has showed me that kind of love in a long time. He also helped me put up baby-themed wallpaper and bought me bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches whenever I had killer pregnancy cravings, which was about every 2 hours for 6 months. Regrettably, I gained 60 pounds thanks to those BLT sandwiches. I also wondered as I stood in front of the mirror, how would I support the baby and me? Surely, I thought, my dancing days were over. Fat, grouchy, and tired of having some kid push on my guts for 9 months, I went into labor on June 28th, 1988. I was in labor for 24 hours before I finally delivered my daughter. I started out the day before at my parents' house where I moaned and groaned like a big baby until my mother thought I might actually deliver one. I'm going to go ahead and skip over this part. It's just talking about the birth and whatnot. All right, so she has the baby. While the doctor stitched up the huge tear in my birth canal, a nurse holding my daughter quickly bent her over to show her to me and rushed her away. My daughter had barely opened her pretty brown eyes to look at me before she was gone. No one explained to me what was happening, so I started to panic. "What's wrong with my daughter?" I demanded. "I want to hold her." "Please calm down, ma'am," said a voice. They rolled me away to my room where I had to wait several more hours before they let me visit her in the intensive care unit. It turned out the green water that broke was a sign that there was meconium, in other words, baby poo, in my amniotic fluid. They further explained that my baby was experiencing breathing problems because she had inhaled some of the meconium. My daughter also had Mongolian blue spots on the lower part of her body. When I saw them, I immediately blamed myself and later confessed to the doctor that I snorted cocaine the first 3 months of pregnancy. But the doctor assured me that the spots weren't due to my recreational drug use. "Actually," he said, "they are common in Asian babies. Is your baby's father Asian?" Pause. Yes, I replied in a low voice. I rolled over to the side of the bed with gritted teeth. I really didn't need him to remind me that she was half Asian while I was laying there bleeding and in pain. Every time I heard the word Asian, I cringed at the thought of Toggy and how I prostituted myself with him. Let's pause there. Imagine being a white woman in an interracial relationship. The guy who you're in a relationship with either pimps you, abuses you, or beats you, or whatever. Be he Asian, Black, Hispanic, multiracial. Imagine you get away from that person. Imagine you're in the process of healing. You're trying to rationalize what happened. That's where the racism starts. So next time you come across a really racist sex worker, remember what I just read. And then realize that that particular sex worker needs to heal. It's going to take years for her to heal. And until she leaves the industry, that's the only way that she can heal. And that's the only way that that racism will ever die down. But it might not. It might not. All right. Several hours later, the nurse came in and asked me to sign my daughter's birth certificate. Finally, the moment I would announce to the world the beautiful name I had chosen for her. Tiffany Ann Moore. I wrote out perfectly the name and signed the rest until I got to the part where it said father's name. I stopped writing. There was no way I was going to put Toggy's name on my daughter's birth certificate after he threatened to take my baby away. The nurse looked at me strangely and said, "You don't know who your baby's father is?" I felt like blurting out, "No, I do not know who the father is because I am a dumb prostitute." But I held my tongue and simply replied, "No." The nurse took the certificate, and later, when she gave it back to me, next to the father's name, it read, "Refused to state." Great, I thought. Now I'm an official single mother. After a traumatizing birth experience and coming home to an empty house, reality entered in, and I started to understand how alone I really was. A 19-year-old child raising a child. I had no idea what I was doing and no one to help me. My mother was too far away, and the only friends I had were the Mexican ladies who lived next door who barely spoke any English. "Hola, ¿cómo estás?" I blurted out, holding my new baby. The Mexican ladies loved my daughter, Tiffany. They thought she was a little Mexican baby. "No," I replied, "she's half Asian." "Oh," they answered. If only I had been given $1 for every time I said that. And someone gave me a strange look. After several months of struggling to be a single mom and living off the great state of California, it was finally time for me to go back to work. I called up my old boss at the last call and told him I had my baby and had lost over 60 pounds, and he was thrilled to have me back. My old regulars were still there and showered me with gifts and money to celebrate my great return. I showed off pictures of Tiffany to customers while serving them drinks and giving them table dances. One man flipped out a 20 and asked me to squirt breast milk into his coffee. What a great idea, I thought, so I hustled breast milk squirts for a few months and made a killing, since I was the only girl who could do it. But after a while, I became old meat again, and I had to move to another strip club to try and support Tiffany and me. The same vicious cycle repeated itself once again. But this time, I swore to myself I would never do prostitution again. Wait a minute. I said never again, didn't I? So that's chapter 5. Thanks to anyone who stayed with me during this podcast. I guess it was a little bit lengthy, but I felt compelled to read that particular chapter this evening, considering some tweets that I posted today, especially in regards to why I think it should be illegal for any active adult performer or sex worker to have custody of a child. It's such a hard situation. It really is. But you gotta look at the well-being of the child, because the thing is that whether the child finds out mistakenly, by accident, no matter how you explain to the child, if at any point you're an active sex worker while you have a child in your custody, you are planting that seed in that child's head that if they hadn't been born, you wouldn't be doing that. Because no matter what, that is going to hurt that child when they learn what it is that you are doing. It's going to hurt them in some way, and then they're going to grow up and they're either going to consistently feel guilty and end up in a bad relationship because they're going to feel a certain way about themselves and about the world, or they're going to grow up to hate you, or they're going to grow up to hate themselves. There's no win. There's no win. What's the right thing to do? I don't know, because I'm not God. I don't know. But I'm hoping that we can just get to a point in the future to where adult entertainers are not treated like, not even like, but worse than circus animals. How that's going to happen, I don't know. I really don't know. But I do know that getting the truth out there is important. I do know that sharing opinions that many may not agree with is important. I know that creating an active discussion and dialogue is important. And I know that consistently calling out frauds, abuse, criminal activity, and all that kind of stuff is important. So again, I'm Alex Mayers. You can follow me on Twitter at Alex Mayers Live. You can follow me on my official website, alexandramayerslive.com. And that's about it for this evening. It was a long one, but I think it was a decent podcast. Have a good night. Bye-bye.